The Cumans, Turkish, kuman / plural kumanlar Hungarian, kun / plural kunok, Greek, kappa omicron, upsilon, mu omicron iota, ko, u, mánoi, Latin, Pallidi, Comani, Cuni, Romanian, kuman / plural cumani, Polish, Połowcy, Połowcy, Kumanoi, Russian, Połowcy, Ukrainian, Połowcy, Bulgarian, Czech, Plovci, Georgian, German, Phalans, Falagi, Valvi, Valuan, Valani, were a Turkic nomadic people comprising the western branch of the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation. After the Mongol invasion, 1237, many sought asylum in Hungary. The Cumans had also settled in Hungary and Bulgaria before the Mongol invasion. Related to the Pechenegs, they inhabited a shifting area north of the Black Sea and along the Volga River known as Cumania, where the Cuman-Kipchaks meddled in the politics of the Caucasus and the Khwarezm Empire. Many eventually settled to the west of the Black Sea, influencing the politics of Kievan Rus, the Galicia Volhynia Principality, the Golden Horde Khanate, the Second Bulgarian Empire, Kingdom of Serbia, the Kingdom of Hungary, Moldavia, the Kingdom of Georgia, Abkhazia, the Byzantine Empire, the Empire of Nicaea, the Latin Empire and Wallachia. The Cumans also had a preeminent role in the Fourth Crusade and in the creation of the Second Bulgarian Empire. Cuman and Kipchak tribes joined politically to create the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation. The Cuman language is attested in some medieval documents and is the best known of the early Turkic languages. The Codex Cumanicus was a linguistic manual which was written to help Catholic missionaries communicate with the Cuman people. The Cumans were fierce and formidable nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppe who exerted an enduring impact on the medieval Balkans. They were numerous, culturally sophisticated, and militarily powerful. The basic instrument of Cuman political success was military force, which dominated each of the warring Balkan factions. Groups of the Cumans settled and mingled with the local population in regions of the Balkans. Those Cumans that settled in the Balkans were the founders of three successive Bulgarian dynasties, Asenids, Tertorids, and Shishmanids, and the Wallachian dynasty, Basarabids. But in the cases of the Basarab and Asenid dynasties, medieval documents refer to them as Vlach, Romanian, dynasties. They played an active role in the Byzantine Empire, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Second Bulgarian Empire and Kingdom of Serbia, with Cuman immigrants being integrated into each country's elite. The Cuman's name in Russian and German means yellow, in reference to the color of the Cuman's hair. The Ukrainian word Połowcy means blonde, pale yellow, since the old Ukrainian word polovo means straw. Cuman, Kuba, means pale yellow, yellowish gray, pale, sallow, cream-colored in Turkic. Some authors put forward the idea that the name Połowcy referred to men of the field, or of the steppe, from the Ukrainian word pol, open ground, field, not to be confused with Polyana, cf. Greek polis, city. In Slavic languages the word Polyana literally means open ground, field. According to O. Suleimanov, Połowcy came from a word for blue-eyed, since the Serbo-Croatian word plav means blue. The Eastern Slavic equivalent would take the regular form *polov. A West Rus chronograph refers to the Cumans as being called Połowcy and Kom. The Western Cumans, or Połowcy, were also called Sarachenitsas by the Rus, this word deriving from Sari Chekel, which means yellow-haired in Turkic. The word was also evident in the Sari people, who went ahead of or were pushed by the Kun. It uncertain whether the etymology was actually referring to Cumans or mostly Kipchaks, as both tribes had fused together and lived side by side. The Cumans were called Falban, Valani, or Valwi by Germans. In the German account by Adam of Bremen, and in Matthäus of Edessa, the Cumans were referred to as the blonde ones. They were called kun, kaun, /kunok by the Hungarians, and Połowcy /polovek, from Old East Slavic yellow, by the Russians, all meaning blonde. The word Kipchak is derived from the Iranian kip for red or blonde and chak meaning scyth. It is unknown which group historians were referring to when they used the name Kipchak, as they could have been referring to the Cumans only, the Kipchaks only, or both together. The two nations joined and lived together, and possibly exchanged weaponry, culture, and fused languages, with the Cumans encompassing the western half of the confederation, while the Kipchaks and, presumably, the Kangli/Kankalis, a ruling clan of the Pechenegs, encompassing the eastern half. This confederation and their living together may have made it difficult for historians to write exclusively about either nation. Some of the clans of the Cuman-Kipchaks were, the Turtaroba, Turtrobici, Etioba/Iatioba, K, Idagli, Kokoba, meaning Ram clan, Eurosoba, Elborali, Kangaragli, and Jogli, Durut, Jartan, Karaberkli, Khotan/Hotan, Kulebeagli, Olelrik, Altunipa, meaning Gold clan, Toksabika, Burchevika, Bolasheviki, Bolashokalu, Kitieviki, Ilabici, Kolabiki, Itebiki, Yeltunavika, Yedabici, Burish, Olperliyove, Olperlu, Emiakavi, Yemek, Falagi, Albertli, Toksabici/Mamluk, Toksaba, meaning plump leather bottle or 9 clans, Borshal/Burjogli, meaning pepper sons, native tribe of a Mamluk sultan, Ksertan/Kurtan, meaning pike, Olas/Ulas, meaning union, federation, Kor/Kol, meaning little, few, Ilunsuk, meaning little snake, and Kongsog, the latter 7 having settled in Hungary. History. Origins. The ethnic origins of the Cumanians are uncertain. The Cumans were reported to have had blonde hair, fair skin, and blue eyes, which set them apart from other groups and later puzzled historians, although their anthropological characteristics suggests that their geographical origin might be in Inner Asia, South Siberia, or as Istvan Vasari postulates, east of the large bend of the Yellow River in China. Robert Wolff states that it is conjectured that ethnically the Cumans may not originally have been Turkic. The Roman natural philosopher Pliny, who lived in the 1st century AD, in describing the gates of Caucasus, Derbent, or Darial Gorge, mentions a fortress, the name of which is Cumania, erected for the purpose of preventing the passage of the innumerable tribes that lay beyond. The Darial Gorge, also known as the Iberian Gates or the Caucasian Gates, is referred to by the Greek philosopher Strabo as Porta Caucasica and Porta Cumana. The writings of Al-Merwazi, c. 1120, state that the Kun people, as the Cumans were called in Hungary, came from the northern Chinese borders, the land of Khitai, possibly during a part of a migration from further east. After leaving the lands of the Khitans, possibly due to Khitai expansion, they entered the territory of the Sheri/Sari people. Merwazi wrote that the Kun were Nestorian Christians. It cannot be concluded whether the Cumans conquered the Kipchaks or simply represent the western mass of largely Kipchak Turkic-speaking tribes. A victim of the Cuman migration to the west was the Kievan Khanate, which dissolved but then regrouped under Kipchak Cuman leadership. Due to this, Kievan tribal elements were represented amongst the Cuman-Kipchaks. The Kun are also mentioned by the Syrian historian Yakut in the Dictionary of Countries, where he mentions, the 6th Iklim, begins where the meridian shadow of the equinox is 7/6, and 1/6 of 1/10 of a foot. Its end exceeds its beginning by only 1 foot. It begins in the homeland of the Kani, Kun, Kirkaz, Kimak, at Tagazgaz, the lands of the Turkomans, Fa with Macron Ra with Macron B, and the country of the Hazars. The Armenian historian, Matthew of Edessa, also mentioned the Cumans, by the name Artek, Karts, meaning blonde, pale, fair. The Cumans entered the grasslands of the southern Russian steppe in the 11th century and continued to assault the Byzantine Empire, the Kingdom of Hungary, the Principality of Pereyaslav and Kievan Rus. The Cumans' entry into the area pressed the Oghuz Turks to shift west, which in turn caused the Pechenegs to move to the right of the Dnieper River. Cuman and Rus attacks contributed to the Oghuz departure from the steppes north of the Black Sea. The Cumans first entered the Bugisi, Bessarabia, at some point around 1068-1078. The Cumans launched a joint expedition with the Pechenegs against Adrianople in 1078. During that same year the Cumans were also fighting the Rus. The Russian primary chronicle mentions Yemek Cumans who were active in the region of Volga Bulgaria. The vast territory of the Cuman-Kipchak realm consisted of loosely connected tribal units who were the dominant military force but were never politically united by a strong central power. The Khans acted on their own initiative. The Cuman-Kipchaks never established a state, instead forming a Cuman-Kipchak confederation, Cumania/Deshti Kipchak/Zemelja Polovekaja, Polovchan land, /Pol Poloveko, Polovchan plain, which stretched from the Danube in the west to Taraz, Kazakhstan in the east. This was possibly due to their facing no prolonged threat before the Mongol invasion, and it may have either prolonged their existence or quickened their destruction. Robert Wolfe states that it was discipline and cohesion that permitted the Cuman-Kipchaks to conquer such a vast territory. Alidra states that Cumania got its name from the city of Cumania. He wrote from the city of Hazaria to the city of Kirite is 25 miles. From there to Cumani, which has given its name to the Cumans, it is 25 miles. This city is called Black Cumania. From the city of Black Cumania to the city of Tmutarakan, Mati Eluka, which is called White Cumania, it is 50 miles. White Cumania is a large inhabited city. Indeed, in this fifth part of the seventh section there is the northern part of the land of Russia and the northern part of the land of Cumania. In this sixth part there is a description of the land of Inner Cumania and parts of the land of Bulgaria. The Golden Horde Khanate was also referred to as Cumania by Armenian chronicler Hayton, of Kurakos. The Moroccan traveller, Ibn Battuta, said of Cumania, "This wilderness is green and grassy with no trees, nor hills, high or low, there is no means of traveling in this desert except in wagons." The Persian historian, Hamdallah Mustafi, wrote that Cumania has a cold climate and that it has excellent pasturage and numerous cattle and horses. The traveller, John Mandeville, wrote that Cumania is one of the great kingdoms in the world, but it is not all inhabited. For at one of the parts there is so great cold that no man may dwell there, and in another part there is so great heat that no man may endure it, and the principal city of Cumania is Klepsaraksarai, that is one of the 3 ways for to go into India. But by that way, he may not pass no great multitude of people, but if it be in winter. And that passage men cleep the Derbend. The other way is for to go from the city of Turkestan by Persia, and by that way be many journeys by desert. And the third way is that cometh from Cumania and then to go by the Great Sea and by the kingdom of Abchas. After that, the Comanians that were in servage in Egypt, felt themselves that they were of great power, they chose them a Soldan amongst them, the which made him to be clept Melech Allen. And in his time entered into the country of the kings of France St. Louis, and fought with him, and the Soldan took him and imprisoned him, and this Soldan was slain by his own servants. And after, they chose another to be Soldan, that they clept Timpiman, and he let deliver St. Louis out of prison for a certain ransom. And after, one of these Comanians reigned, that hight Cassius, and slew Timpiman, for to be Soldan, and made him be clept Melech Menes. According to the 12th century Jewish traveller Pedikia of Regensburg, they have no king, only princes and royal families. Cumans interacted with the Rus principalities, Bulgaria, Byzantine Empire, and the Wallachian states in the Balkans, with Armenia and Kingdom of Georgia, see Kipchaks in Georgia, in the Caucasus, and with the Khwarezm Empire in Central Asia. The Cuman-Kipchaks constituted an important element and were closely associated with the Khwarezmian royal house. Via marital alliances, the Cumans were also active in commerce with traders from Central Asia to Venice. The Cumans had a commercial interest in Crimea where they also took tribute from Crimean cities. A major area of commerce was the ancient city of Sudak, which was viewed by Ibn al-Air as the city of the Kipchak from which flow their material possessions. It is on the Hazar Sea. Ships come to it bearing clothes. The Kipchaks buy from them and sell them slaves. Bird as furs, beaver, squirrels. Due to their political dominance, the Cuman language became the lingua franca of the region. Thus the language was adopted by the Karaite Jewish and Crimean Armenian communities, who produced many documents written in Kipchak with the Armenian alphabet, where it was preserved for centuries up to the modern day. The Cuman-Kipchaks created a powerful caste of warriors, the Mamluks, and the Mamluk Sultanate, Cairo. These Mamluks came from Crimea and were from the Cuman clans of Burcheviki, Mamluk Burchokalu, a part of which also settled in Hungary and mentioned as the Borshal, Idaba and Toxabichi, Mamluk Toxaba. These three clans were mentioned by Rus sources, the former two appearing to be part of the non-wild Cumans. The Mamluks were seen as true lords, with social status above freeborn Egyptian Muslims. 44 The Cuman-Kipchak Qutb-ud Aibak was appointed as governor of a part of the realm of Muhammad Ghori. Qutb proclaimed independence after the death of his patron and created the Delhi Sultanate. His line is known as the Mamluk dynasty due to his origin. 46 The most prominent Cuman Sultan of the Mamluk Sultanate was Sultan Bibars, who defeated King Louis IX of France and resisted the Mongol invasion, defeating them at the Battle of Anjalut and the Battle of Elbistan. By using the feigned retreat tactic, he is considered as one of the greatest medieval Muslim leaders. Mamluks in the empire retained a particularly strong sense of Cuman identity, to the degree that the biography of Sultan Bibars, as reflected by Ibn Shaddad, focused on his birth and early years in Deshti Kipchak, steppe of the Kipchaks/Cumania, as well as enslavement and subsequent travels to Bulgaria and the Near East. The historian Dmitry Korobenikov relates how Bibar's story sums up the tragic fate of many Cumans after the Battle of Volga River and the Mongol invasion of Europe. Roman Kovalev states that this story can further be seen as a mechanism for the preservation of a collective memory broadly reflecting a sense of Cuman identity in the Mamluk Sultanate. In the latter part of the 1260s the Mamluks were allied with the Golden Horde against the Il Khanate. The creation of this specific warrior class was described as the Mamluk phenomenon by David Ayalon and was of great political importance. Battles in Kievan Rus and the Balkans. The Cumans first encountered the Rus in 1055, when they advanced towards the Rus Peryaslafal Principality, but Prince Vsevolod I of Kiev reached an agreement with them, thus avoiding a military confrontation. In 1061, however, the Cumans, under the chieftain Sokol, invaded and devastated the Rus Peryaslafal Principality. This was the beginning of a war that would go on for 175 years. In 1068 at the Battle of the Alta River, the Cumans defeated the armies of the three sons of Yaroslav the Wise, Sviatoslav II of Kiev, and Vsevolod Yaroslavic. After the Cuman victory, they repeatedly invaded Ukraine, devastating the land and taking captives, who became either slaves or were sold at markets in the south. The most vulnerable regions were the Principality of Peryaslafal, the Principality of Novgorod-Seversk and the Principality of Chernigov. The Cumans initially managed to defeat the great Prince Vladimir Monomakh of Kievan Rus in 1093 at the Battle of the Stugna River, but they were defeated later by the combined forces of Russian principalities led by Monomakh and forced out of the Rus borders to the Caucasus. In these battles some Pecheneg and Oghuz groups were liberated from the Cumans and incorporated into the Rus border guard system. Khan Boniak launched invasions on Kiev in 1096, 1097, 1105, and 1107. In 1096 Boniak attacked Kiev and burned down the princely palace in Berestov. He also plundered the Kievan cave monastery. Boniak was defeated in 1107, by the Kievan Rus prince's forces near Lubny. In 1109 Monomakh launched another raid against the Cumans and captured 1,000 tents. In 1111-1113 and 1116 further raids were launched against the Cumans and resulted in the liberation and incorporation of more Pecheneg and Oghuz tribes. During this time the Cumans raided the Byzantine Empire and Volga Bulgaria. Volga Bulgaria was attacked again at a later stage, by Khan Ipa, father-in-law of Prince Yuri Dolgoruki, perhaps at the instigation of the prince. The Volga Bulgars in turn poisoned Ipa and the other princes, all of them died. Cumans at that time also resettled in the Kingdom of Georgia and were Christianized. There they achieved prominent positions, helped Georgians to stop the advance of Seljuk Turks, and helped make Georgia the most powerful kingdom of the region. They were referred to as Kipchakari. After the death of warlike Monomac in 1125, Cumans returned to the steppe along the Rus borders. Fighting resumed in 1128. Rus sources mention that in 1128 Sevinch, son of Khan Boniak, expressed the desire to plant his sword in the Golden Gate of Kiev as his father had done before him. 282 On March 20, 1155 Prince Gleb Yuryevic took Kiev with the help of a Cuman army under the Cuman prince Kamgura. By 1160 Cuman raids into Rus had become an annual event. These attacks put pressure on Rus and affected trade routes to the Black Sea and Constantinople, in turn leading Rus to again attempt action. Offensives were halted during 1166-1169, when Grand Prince Andrei Bogolyubsky, son of Khan Ipa's daughter, took control of Kiev in 1169 and installed Gleb Irovish as his puppet. Gleb Irovish brought in wild Cumans as well as Oghuz and Berendei units. Later, the princes of the Principality of Chernigov attempted to use Khan-Kipchak's army against Kievan Rus and Suzdal. This Chernigov-Cuman alliance suffered a disastrous defeat in 1180, El-Rud, Kipchak's brother, dying in battle. In 1177 a Cuman army that was allied with Ryazan sacked 6 cities that belonged to the Berendei and Torkil. In 1183 Rus defeated a large Cuman army and captured Khan Kobek, as well as his sons and other notables. Subsequent to this, Khan-Kipchak concluded negotiations. Khan-Kipchak, much like his son Khan Khitan preceding the Mongol invasion, was successful in creating a more cohesive force out of the many Cuman groups. He united the western and eastern Cuman-Kipchak tribes. Khan-Kipchak also changed the old Cuman system of government whereby rulership went to the most senior tribal leader. Instead he passed it on to his son Khitan. 22 Igor Sviatoslavic, prince of the Principality of Novgorod-Seversk, attacked the Cumans in the vicinity of the Kyla River in 1185, but was defeated, this battle being immortalized in the Rus epic poem The Tale of Igor's Campaign and Alexander Borodin's opera Prince Igor. The dynamic pattern of attacks and counterattacks between Rus and the Cumans indicates that both the Cumans and the Rus rarely, if ever, were able to attain the unity needed to deal a fatal blow. The Cuman attacks on Rus could often have Caucasian and Danubian European implications. In the Balkans, the Cumans were in contact with all the statal entities, fighting with the Kingdom of Hungary, allied with the Bulgarians of the Second Bulgarian Empire. They were the empire's most effective military component, and blocs against the Byzantine Empire, and involved in the politics of the fresh bloc states. A variant of the oldest Turkic chronicle, Oghuz name, the Oghuz Khan's Tale, mentions the Cumans fighting the Magyars, Rus, Romanians, Polak, and Bashkirs, who had refused to submit to their authority. A notable Cuman leader in Europe, though Kamar, Toktamir, meaning hardened steel, was possibly the first to unite the Romanian, Vlach, states from the west and the east of the Alt River. Though Kamar's son Basarabai of Wallachia, father king in the Cuman language, is considered the founder and first ruler of the united and independent Kingdom of Wallachia. This interpretation corresponds with the general view of the situation of Romania in the 11th century, with the natives living in collections of village communities united in small confederacies, and with powerful chiefs competing to create small kingdoms. Some of these Romanian chiefs paid tribute to the militarily dominant nomadic tribes that surrounded them. Hungarian King Ladislaus of Hungary, left, fighting a Cuman warrior, right, from the Zakliderj, Darju, Unitarian Church, Romania. In 1089, Ladislaus of Hungary defeated the Cumans after they attacked the Kingdom of Hungary. In 1091, the Pechenegs, a semi-nomadic Turkic people of the prairies of southwestern Eurasia, were decisively defeated as an independent force at the Battle of Levo-Union by the combined forces of a Byzantine army under Emperor Alexios I Komnenos and a Cuman army under Togurtok/Tagorkan and Boniak. Attacked again in 1094 by the Cumans, many Pechenegs were again slain. Some of the Pechenegs fled to Hungary, as the Cumans themselves would do a few decades later. In 1091–1092 the Cumans, under Kopolch, raided Transylvania and Hungary, moving to Byr and getting as far as the Tisa and Timi rivers. Loaded with goods and prisoners they then split into 3 groups, after which they were attacked and defeated by King Ladislaus I of Hungary. In 1092 the Cumans resumed their raids against the Rus and also attacked the Kingdom of Poland. In 1094–1095 the Cumans, led by Tagorkan, in support of the exiled Byzantine pretender Constantine Diogenes, as a pretext to plundering, invaded the Balkans and conquered the Byzantine province of Paris-Traian. The Cumans then advanced all the way to Adrianople and Anchialos but couldn't conquer them. In the following years, when knights of the First Crusade were passing through the empire, Byzantium offered the Cumans prestige titles and gifts in order to appease them. Subsequently good relations ensued. In 1097–1099, Svyatopolk II of Kiev requested help from the Cumans against Koloman, king of Hungary, who was involved in a feud with Volodar of Przemysl, prince of Przemysl. King Koloman and his army crossed the Carpathian mountain and laid siege on Przemysl, which prompted David Igorevic, one of Volodar Rostislavic's allies, to convince the Cumans, under Kon Boniak and Altunipa, to attack the Hungarians. The Hungarian army was soundly crushed by the Cumans. The illuminated chronicle mentions that rarely did Hungarians suffer such slaughter as in this battle. In 1104 the Cumans were allied with Prince Volodar of the Principality of Przemysl. In 1106, the Cumans advanced into the Principality of Volhynia, but were repelled by Svyatopolk II. In 1114 the Cumans launched an invasion, from the western Romanian plain, into the Byzantine Balkans once more. This was followed up by another incursion in 1123–1124. In 1135 the Cumans invaded the Kingdom of Poland. During the Second and Third Crusades, in 1147 and 1189, Crusaders were attacked by Cumans, who were allied to the Asen dynasty of the Second Bulgarian Empire or were in Byzantine service. In alliance with the Bulgarians and Vlachs, the Cumans are believed to have played a significant role in the Vlach-Bulgar rebellion led by brothers Asen and Peter of Tarnovo, resulting in victory over Byzantium and the restoration of Bulgaria's independence in 1185. Istvan Vasari states that without the active participation of the Cumans, the Vlacho-Bulgarian rebels could never have gained the upper hand over the Byzantines, and ultimately without the military support of the Cumans, the process of Bulgarian restoration could never have been realized. The Cuman participation in the creation of the Second Bulgarian Empire in 1185 and thereafter brought about basic changes in the political and ethnic sphere of Bulgaria and the Balkans. 12 The Cumans were allies in the Bulgarian Latin wars with Emperor Kaloyan of Bulgaria, who was descended from the Cumans. In 1205, at the Battle of Adrianople, 1205, 14,000 Cuman light cavalry contributed to Kaloyan's crushing victory over the Latin Crusaders. Cuman troops continued to be hired throughout the 13th and 14th century by both the Bulgarians and Byzantines. The Cumans who remained east and south of the Carpathian Mountains established a county named Cumania, which was a strong military base in an area consisting parts of Moldavia and Wallachia. The Hungarian kings claimed supremacy over Cumania. Among the 9 titles of the Hungarian kings of the Arpad and Anjou dynasties were Rex Cumanii, but few, if any, Cuman leaders recognized their overlordship, pointing to the fact that Rex Cumanii was an allegory title since the kings never fulfilled that role. The Cuman influence in Wallachia and Moldavia was very strong, according to some historians who claim that the earliest Wallachian rulers bore Cuman names, e.g. Tihomir and Basarab. The Cumans played a crucial role in the formation of Wallachia at the end of the 14th century. Many of the first Romanian noblemen were of Cuman descent. Transylvania enjoyed Cuman protection against Hungarian incursions into the Carpathians. The toponymy of the most densely populated regions of Romanian settlement shows strong evidence of Cuman place names. With a lack of convincing archaeological evidence of a Cuman civilization, it appears the Cumans were a minority in the local population, but they made up part of the ruling elite in Wallachia. Basarab, son of the Wallachian prince Khwarezm of Wallachia, obtained independence from Hungary at the beginning of the 14th century. The dynasty was founded by the Cumans, the name meaning father king. It is generally believed by historians, Bulgarian and Hungarian, amongst others, that the Bulgarian medieval dynasties Asen, Shishman, and Turtur were Cumanian. Leading figures of the Turturoba clan as well as Khan-Khitan's relatives settled in Bulgaria. Mongol invasions. Like most other peoples of medieval Eastern Europe, the Cumans put up a resistance against the relentlessly advancing Mongols led by Jeb and Subutai. The Mongols crossed the Caucasus Mountains in pursuit of Muhammad II, the Shah of the Khwarezm Empire, and met and defeated the Cumans in Sub-Caucasia in 1220. The Cuman Khans Danilo Kabyakovic and Yuri Konkakovic died in battle, while the other Cumans, commanded by Khan Khitan, managed to get aid from the Rus princes. As the Mongols were approaching Russia, Khan Khitan fled to the court of his son-in-law, Prince Mstislav the Bold of Galician, where he gave numerous presents, horses, camels, buffaloes, and girls. And he presented these gifts to them, and said the following: "Today the Mongols took away our land and tomorrow they will come and take away yours." The Cumans were ignored for almost a year, however, as the Rus had suffered from their raids for decades. But when news reached Kiev that the Mongols were marching along the Dniester River, the Rus responded. Mstislav of Galician then arranged a council of war in Kiev, which was attended by Mstislav Romanovich, Prince Yuri II of Vladimir Suzdal and Mstislav Sviatoslavic of Chernigov. The princes promised support to Khan Khitan's Cumans and an alliance between the Rus and Cumans was formed. It was decided that the Rus and Cumans would move east to seek and destroy any Mongols they found. The Rus princes then began mustering their armies and moved towards the rendezvous point. The army of the alliance of the Rus and Cumans numbered around 80,000. When the alliance reached Pereyaslav, they were met by a Mongol envoy that tried to persuade them not to fight. This as well as a second attempt by the Mongols failed. The alliance then crossed the Dnieper River and marched eastward for 9 days pursuing a small Mongol contingent, unknowingly being led by a false retreat. The battle took place near Volga River in 1223, Battle of Volga River. Due to confusion and mistakes by the Rus and Cumans, the battle was lost. The Cumans and Rus were defeated. In the chaos the Cumans managed to retreat, but the Rus failed to regroup and were crushed. The Cumans were allied in this battle with Wallach warriors named Brodniks, led by Ploskania. Citation needed. Brodnik's territory was in the lower parts of the Prut River in modern Romania and Moldova. During the Second Mongol invasion of Eastern Europe in 1237–1240 the Cumans were defeated again. At this time groups of Cumans went to live with the Volga Bulgars, who had not been attacked yet. Istvan Vasari states that after the Mongol conquest, a large-scale westward migration of the Cumans began. Certain Cumans also moved to Anatolia, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. In the summer of 1237 the first wave of this Cuman exodus appeared in Bulgaria. The Cumans crossed the Danube, and this time Tsar Ivan Asen II could not tame them, as he had often been able to do earlier. The only possibility left for him was to let them march through Bulgaria in a southerly direction. They proceeded through Thrace as far as Hadrianopolis and Didymotoi-Chan, plundering and pillaging the towns and the countryside, just as before. The whole of Thrace became, as Acropolites put it, a Scythian desert. A direct attack on Cumania came only in 1238–1239, and encountered serious resistance by various Cuman Khans. The final blow came in 1241, when the Cuman control over the Pontic steppes ended and the Cuman-Kipchak confederation ceased to exist as a political entity, with the remaining Cuman tribes being dispersed, either becoming subjects and mixing with their Mongol conquerors as part of what was to be known as the Golden Horde, Kipchak Khanate, and Nogai Horde, or fleeing to the west, to the Byzantine Empire, the Second Bulgarian Empire, and the Kingdom of Hungary, where they integrated into the elite and became kings and nobles with many privileges. Other Cuman captives were sent to Egypt to be sold as slaves. These slaves would go on to become Mamluks, who would attain the rank of sultan, or hold regional power as emirs or beys. Some of these Cumans, now as Mamluks, would fight the Mongols again, defeating them at the Battle of Anjalut and Battle of Elbistan. Settlement on the Hungarian plain. King Andrew II of Hungary granted the Burzenland region to the Teutonic Knights in 1211, with the purpose of ensuring security of the southeastern borders of his kingdom against the Cumans. The Teutonic Knights campaigned against the Cumans, on behalf of King Andrew, during the years of 1221–1225. However, the Teutonic Knights failed to defeat the Cumans and began to establish a country independent of the King of Hungary. In 1238, after Mongol attacks on Cumania, King Bela IV of Hungary offered refuge to the remainder of the Cuman people under their leader Khan Kudhen. Hungarians spelled his name Kotany/Kitan. Kudhen in turn vowed to convert his 40,000 families to Christianity. King Bela hoped to use the new subjects as auxiliary troops against the Mongols, who were already threatening Hungary. The Cumans were joined by the Iranian Jas people, who had been living with the Cumans. Batu-Khan of the Mongols then ordered Bela to stop giving refuge to the Cumans and made a particular point that if attacked the Cumans could easily run away, for they were skilled horsemen, but not so for the Hungarians, who were a sedentary nation and had no such luxury. Bela rejected this ultimatum. Around December 1240 news came that the Mongols were advancing towards Hungary. King Bela then installed front-line defenses at the Carpathian Mountains, after which he returned to Buda and called a council of war, in which he ordered unity against the Mongols. The opposite happened, as many of the barons were hostile towards the Cumans. The Hungarian barons noted that there were Cumans in the Mongol armies, but they didn't realize that this was because they were conscripted into it and had no say in the matter. In particular, they didn't trust Khitan, despite the fact that the Mongols have attacked his people for nearly 20 years. This chaos pushed Bela into a corner, who, feeling he needed to show his strength and keep the rebellious barons on side, ordered Khitan to be placed under house arrest. This did not placate the barons and had an opposite effect of erroneously seeming to admit that the king harbored doubts about Khitan too. This angered the Cumans, who were far from happy about the actions taken against them, who had nothing to invite such actions and hated the Mongols more than most. News arrived on March 10 that the Mongols had attacked the Hungarian defenses at the Carpathian passes. This prompted Bela to send a letter to Duke Frederick of Austria asking for help. Frederick had previously wanted Bela's throne, but Bela responded by amassing a vast army and marching to the gates of Vienna, which forced Frederick to step back. On March 14 news had arrived that the Carpathian defense forces were defeated by the Mongols. Ironically, given the suspicion of the Cumans, they were the only ones who seemed willing to fight the Mongols, the memory of the fate that had befallen them on the steppes still being fresh in their minds. At the time, the Hungarian forces were cowered behind the walls of Sibiu. By this time Bela had lost control of his army and many towns were destroyed. Soon after, Frederick arrived and, wishing to harm the country's defense, in revenge to Bela, stirred up further feelings against the Cumans. After crushing defeats and facing complete collapse, the Hungarians engaged in a suicidal betrayal of the Cumans, the people that had done the most in repelling the Mongols. Some of the barons went to Khitan's house with the intent of killing him as scapegoat or handing him over to the Mongols. But Khitan had already realized that he would be handed over to the Mongols or killed, so he had already killed himself and his wives. The barons then cut off their heads and threw them onto the streets outside the house in an act of brutality and stupidity that had dire consequences. When news of this outrage reached the Cuman camp, there was an eruption of Vesuvian intensity. In revenge for this undeserved victimization, they slaughtered a vast amount of Hungarians. The enraged Cumans then left for the Balkans and the Second Bulgarian Empire, going on a rampage of destruction through Hungary equal to that which Europe had not experienced since the incursions of the Mongols. With this departure of its only ally and most efficient and reliable military force, Hungary was now further weakened to attack, and a month later it was destroyed by the Mongols. After the invasion, King Bela IV, now penniless and humiliated after the confiscation of his treasury and loss of 3 of his border areas, begged the powerful Cumans to return to Hungary and help rebuild the country. In return for their military service, King Bela IV of Hungary invited the Cumans to settle in areas of the Great Plain between the Danube and the Tis rivers. This region had become almost uninhabited after the Mongol raids of 1241-1242. The Cuman tribes subsequently settled throughout the Great Hungarian Plain, creating 2 regions incorporating the name Cumania, Kunszag in Hungarian, Greater Cumania, Nagy-Kunszag, and Little Cumania, Kis-Kunszag. 6 of these tribes were the Borshal, Borskal, who settled in County of Thames. The Borshal clan was also active around Rus. They were also a tribe of the Golden Horde mentioned as Berkoilu, Kserten, who settled in Little Cumania, Olas, who settled in Greater Cumania, Elongksuk, who settled in Little Cumania, Kor, who settled in the county of Khanate, and the 6th being, possibly, Kongtsag. Historical coat of arms of Kunszag, where Cumans in Hungary settled, divided into Little Cumania and Greater Cumania. As the Cumans came into the kingdom, the Hungarian nobility suspected that the king intended to use the Cumans to strengthen his royal power at their expense. During the following centuries, the Cumans in Hungary were granted rights and privileges, the extent of which depended on the prevailing political situation. Some of these rights survived until the end of the 19th century, although the Cumans had long since assimilated with Hungarians. The Cumans were different in every way to the local population of Hungary. Their appearance, attire, and hairstyle set them apart. In 1270, Elizabeth the Cuman, the daughter of a Cuman chieftain Sihon, became Queen of Hungary. Elizabeth ruled during the minority of her son, future King Ladislaus IV of Hungary, in the years of 1270–1277. A struggle took place between her and the noble opposition, which led to her imprisonment by the rebels, but supporters freed her in 1274. During her reign, gifts of precious clothes, land, and other objects were given to the Cumans with the intent to ensure their continued support, and in particular during the civil war between King Bela IV of Hungary and Stephen V of Hungary, when both sides tried to gain Cuman support. During this conflict, in 1264, Bela sent Cuman troops commanded by the chieftain Menk to fight his son Stephen. Elizabeth married King Stephen V of Hungary. They were parents of 6 children. Their son, Ladislaus IV of Hungary, became the King of Hungary, while her other son, Andrew of Hungary, became Duke of Slavonia. By 1262, Stephen V of Hungary had taken the title of Dominus Cumanorum and became the Cumans' highest judge. After Stephen's enthronement, the Cumans came directly under the power of the King of Hungary, and the title of Dominus Cumanorum, Judge of the Cumans, had passed to the Count Palatine, who was the highest official after the king. The Cumans had their own representatives and were exempt from the jurisdiction of county officials. Modern Cuman horsemen swinging balta axed on horseback. First World Meeting of Cumanians 2009, Nagy-Kunszag. By the 15th century, the Cumans were permanently settled in Hungary, in villages whose structure corresponded to that of the local population, and they were Christianized. The Cumans did not always ally with the Hungarian kings. They assassinated Ladislaus IV the Cuman. However, other sources suggest that certain Hungarian barons had a role in his murder, thus Ladislaus fell victim to his political enemies. The royal and ecclesiastical authorities incorporated, rather than excluded, the Cumans. The Cumans in Hungary served as light cavalry in the royal army, an obligation since they were granted asylum. Being very fierce and capable warriors, as noted by Istvan Vasari, they had an important role in the royal army. The king led them in numerous expeditions against neighboring countries. Most notably, they played an important part in the battle between Rudolf of Habsburg and Ottokar II of Bohemia in 1278. King Ladislaus IV and the Cumans, which numbered 16,000, were on Rudolf's side. Hungarian kings relied on the Cumans to counterbalance the growing independent power of the nobility. Royal policy towards the Cumans was determined by their military and political importance. The Hungarian kings continuously hoped to use Cuman military support, that being the main reason for the invitation to settle and continued royal favors to them. The king's main aim was to secure Cuman loyalty by various means, one of them being intermarriage between the Cumans and the Hungarian royal family. Ladislaus IV the Cuman, whose mother was Queen Elizabeth the Cuman, was particularly fond of the Cumans and abandoned Hungarian culture and dress for Cuman culture, dress and hairstyle. He lived with his Cuman entourage and concubines, who were Kipchak, Mandola and Ajava. There were clashes between the Hungarians and Cumans in 1280 and 1282. The first clash involved the king convincing the Cumans not to leave the country, yet a small group still moved to Wallachia. The second clash was a battle between Cuman rebels and the king's forces. The Cumans initially lived in felt yurts, but as time went by they gradually gave up their nomadic way of life. The head of Cuman clan served the dual role of a military leader and a judge. The Cumans, having their one jurisdiction, were exempt from Hungarian jurisdiction and appealed to the king only in cases of unsettled disagreements. The Cumans paid 3,000 gold bullions a year to the king, as well as other products and animals, since King Bela IV. They had other privileges of self-jurisdiction, having their own judges, magistrates, and priests, and not paying port and custom dues. Cuman villages didn't have landlords and thus no manors were established. This meant that the people of these villages bought off statute labor. The royal guard of the Hungarian kings were Cumans, called Magyar. From the 16th century onwards, the Cumans between the Danube and Tisza rivers were referred to as Kiskan, while the Cumans east of the Tisza river were referred to as Nagykan. The majority of Cumans were exterminated during the Great Turkish War. The Cumanian settlements were destroyed during the Turkish wars in the 16th and 17th centuries. More Cumans than Hungarians were killed. Around 1702, Cuman and Jas privileges were lost. The court sold all three districts to the Teutonic Knights, however the lordship of these three regions was returned to Hungary. In 1734 Kharkag became a market town, due to the permission to organize fairs. During this time, it had bought off its borders as its own property for 43,200 Rhenish florins. On May 6, 1745, due to the cooperation between the Cumans and Jas people, as well as their material strength of their communities, they were able to officially buy off their freedom by paying off more than 500,000 Rhenish florins and by arming and sending to camp 1,000 cavalry. At the beginning of the 18th century the Cumanian territories were resettled by Hungarian-speaking descendants of the Cumans. In the middle of the 18th century they got their status by becoming free farmers and no longer serfs. Here, the Cumans maintained their autonomy, language, and some ethnic customs well into the modern era. According to Pallidji's estimation, originally 70-80,000 Cumans settled in Hungary. Other estimations are 180-200,000. Cuman involvement in Serbia. Cuman involvement in Serbia first occurred as a result of marital ties between Serbia and Hungary. King Stephen V of Hungary gave his daughter, Catherine, whose mother was Queen Elizabeth the Cuman, daughter of the Cuman chieftain Sahan, in marriage to Stefan Dragudin, son of King Stephen Uroi of Serbia. King Uros had promised, both his son and King Stephen, that he would make Dragudin king during his own lifetime, but he later declined this. Dragudin, in disappointment, requested aid from King Stephen, who said that he will lend his Hungarian and Cuman troops. Subsequently, Dragudin set out with his troops and marched to his father. King Uros had declined once more, and in 1276 Dragudin clashed with his father's army in Gacko, winning the battle. Afterwards, Dragudin took the throne, and became king of Serbia. After King Stephen's death, his son, Ladislaus IV the Cuman, continued to support Dragudin, his brother-in-law. From 1270 onwards Cuman mercenaries and auxiliaries were present on both sides of the warring factions, sometimes ignoring the orders of the party they were fighting for, instead acting on their own and looting the countryside. The Cumans had also burned down Zaka, the former see of the Archbishopric of the Serbian Church. By 1272, the region of Branijevo in Serbia had become a Hungarian Banate, but soon afterwards, its rulers, Kudlin and Darman, succeeded in making it an independent state. Kudlin and Darman were either Cuman warriors in Bulgarian service or Bulgarian nobles of Cuman origin. This move to independence had angered King Ladislaus IV the Cuman as well as King Dragutin, who wanted to crush the rebellion. Darman and Kudlin were supported by the Tatars of the Golden Horde, Kipchak Khanate, against the Hungarians and Serbs. Subsequently Dragutin attacked the brothers but failed to defeat them. After this attack the brothers hired Cuman and Tatar mercenaries. Dragutin in turn went to his brother, King Milutin, for help. Dragutin battled the brothers again, this time with King Milutin's help as well as support from King Ladislaus IV, Cuman troops, and defeated them. After this King Ladislaus continued negotiations with Darman and Kudlin, but this had failed, so he sent Transylvanian and Cuman troops against them. The Cumans had fought on both the Bulgarian and Hungarian Serbian sides. The Cumans were also involved with the semi-independent Bulgarian Tsardom of Vidin between 1290–1300, which had become a target of Serbian expansion. In 1280 the Cuman noble, Shishman, became ruler of Vidin. He was perhaps granted the position of despot of Vidin soon after the accession of another Bulgarian noble of Cuman origin, Tsar George Terteri, r. 1280–1292, to the Bulgarian throne in 1280. Shishman was either a close relative or a brother of George Terteri. Shishman may have established his authority over the Vidin region as early as the 1270s, after the death of the previous ruler of that area, Jacob Svetoslav. Danilo, a Serbian archbishop, reported at that time in the land of the Bulgars a prince called Shishman emerged. He lived in the town of Vidin, and obtained the adjacent countries and much of the Bulgarian land. Some years after, Shishman invaded Serbia and got as far as Hvasno. After failing to capture Zdrelo he returned to Vidin. King Milutin then attacked and devastated Vidin. Subsequent to this Milutin replaced him on his throne on the basis that he would become Shishman's ally. The alliance was strengthened by Shishman marrying the daughter of the Serbian Grand Zupan Dragos. Further security came about when Milutin later gave his daughter Anna as a wife to Shishman's son Michael, who later, in 1323, became Tsar of Bulgaria. Golden Horde and Byzantine mercenaries. The Cumans who remained scattered in the prairie of what is now southwest Russia joined the Mongol Golden Horde Khanate, and their descendants became assimilated with local populations including the Mongols, Tatars. The cultural heritage of those Cuman-Kipchaks who remained was transferred to the Mongols, whose elite adopted many of the traits, customs, and language of the Cumans and Kipchaks. The Cumans, Kipchaks, and Mongols finally became assimilated through intermarriage and became the Golden Horde. Those Cumans, with the Turco-Mongols, adopted Islam in the second half of the 13th and the first half of the 14th century. In 1071, Cumans participated in the Battle of Manzikert as mercenaries in the Byzantine army against the Seljuks. Emperor Romanus had sent the Cumans and Franks to secure the fortress of Alat on the shore of Lake Van. The Cumans, who didn't receive their pay, later defected to the Seljuks. In 1086 Cumans devastated Byzantine settlements in the Balkans. Later the Cumans joined the Pechenegs and the former Hungarian king, Salomon, in plundering the Byzantine Balkan provinces. Subsequent to this, the Cumans gave aid to Tatos, the chief of Distra. In 1091 there was a disagreement in plunder shares between the Cumans and Pechenegs, which resulted in a breach between the two peoples. This contributed to the Cumans, led by Togurtok/Tagorkan and Boniak, who had repeatedly raided Kievan Rus, joining Alexos I Komnenos against the Pechenegs in the Battle of Levo Union. A couple of weeks afterwards the Cumans invaded the Balkans. After the Battle of Volga River, a large group of 10,000 Cumans invaded Thrace, where they pillaged towns that had recently come under the control of the Nicaean Empire. This continued until 1242, when Nicaean Emperor John III Doukas Vatatzes, in response to the situation, won their favor with gifts and diplomacy. Thereafter he succeeded in settling most of them in Anatolia throughout the Meander Valley and the region east of Philadelphia. Most of these Cumans enrolled in the army and soon afterwards were baptized. Vatatzes' policy towards the Cumans was distinguished by its enormous scale and relatively successful outcome. Cumans had served as mercenaries in the armies of the Byzantine Empire since the reign of Alexios I Komnenos, 1081–1118, and were one of the most important elements of the Byzantine army until the mid-14th century. They served as light cavalry, horse archers, and as standing troops. Those in the central army were collectively called Scythikoi/Scythican. Other Cumans lived a more dangerous life as highlanders on the fringes of the empire, possibly being involved in a mixture of agriculture and transhumance, acting as a buffer between Nicaean farmers and Turkic nomads. These Cumans were frequently mustered for Byzantine campaigns in Europe. In 1242 they were employed by Vatatzes in his siege of Thessaloniki. In 1256 Emperor Theodore II Lascaris left a force of 300 Cumans with the Nicaean governor of Thessaloniki. In 1259, 2,000 Cuman light cavalry fought for the Nicaean Empire at the Battle of Pelagonia. Cumans were again involved in 1261, where the majority of the 800 troops under Alexios Strategopoulos that retook Constantinople were Cumans. Large Cuman contingents were also part of the Byzantine Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos' European campaigns of 1263–1264, 1270–1272 and 1275. Cumans were again employed by Emperor Andronikos II Palaiologos in 1292, in his campaign against the despotate of Epirus. The Cumans, together with Turk mercenaries, terminated the campaign by an unauthorized retreat. In contrast to their light cavalry counterparts, Cuman standing troops appear as a distinct group only once, albeit very significantly. During Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos' election to the regency in 1258, after the consultation of Latin mercenaries, the Cumans present at the court offered their opinion on the matter in good Greek. This is indicative of the Cumans spending considerable time in the company of Greek speakers. Importance of this Cuman group came from its tendency to foster assimilation, Hellenization, and, through time, the social advancement of its members. An example of this influential group was Citsagan, known as surgeons after baptism, who before 1290, became Megas Domestikos, commander-in-chief of the army, under Emperor Andronikos II. His son, Surgeons Palaiologos, attained the title of Pink Urns and was a friend of Andronikos III Palaiologos and John Kantakisnos. An act from the archive of the Lavra of Athanasios, mentions Cuman stratiati, mercenaries from the Balkans, in the region of Amapia who received 2 douloperoikoi in pronoa, Byzantine form of feudalism based on government assignment of revenue yielding property to prominent individuals in return for military service, sometime before 1184. Culture. Horses were central to Cuman culture and way of life 26, and their main activity was animal husbandry. The knight, Robert de Clary, described the Cumans as nomadic warriors who raised horses, sheep, goats, camels, and cattle. They moved north with their herds in summer and returned south in winter. Some of the Cumans led a semi-settled life and took part in trading and farming, as well as blacksmithing, furriery, shoemaking, saddle-making, bow-making, and clothes-making. They mainly sold and exported animals, mostly horses, and animal products. They attached feeding sacks to the bridles of their horses, allowing them to cover great distances. They could go on campaign with little baggage and carry everything they needed. They wore sheepskin and were armed with composite bows and arrows. They prayed to the first animal they saw in the morning. Like the Bulgars, the Cumans were known to drink blood from their horse, they would cut a vein, when they ran out of water far from an available source. Their traditional diet consisted of soup with millet and meat and included beer, curdled mare's milk, kumis, and bread, though bread could be rare depending on location. The fundamental unit of Cuman society was the family, made up of blood relatives. A group of families formed a clan, led by a chief, a group of clans formed a tribe, led by a khan. A typical Cuman clan was named after an object, animal, or a leader of the clan. The names of the leaders of clans or tribes sometimes ended in apa/aba. Cuman names were descriptive and represented a personal trait or an idea. Clans lived together in movable settlements named Cuman towers by Kievan Rus chroniclers. The Cuman-Kipchak tribes formed sub-confederations governed by charismatic ruling houses. They acted independently of each other and had opposing policies. The territory controlled distinguished each Cuman tribe. The seashore Cuman tribes lived in the steppes between the mouths of the Dnieper River and the Dniester River. The coastal tribes lived on the coast of the Sea of Azov. The Dnieper tribes lived on both banks of the bend in the Dnieper Valley, and the Don Cumans lived in the Don River Valley. D. Arasovsky notes 5 separate independent Cuman groups: the Central Asiatic, the Volga-Yuk, or Ural, the Donets Don, between the Volga and the Dnieper, the lower course of the Dnieper, and the Danube. The Rus grouped the Cuman-Kipchaks into 2 categories: the non-wild Połowchan civilized Cumans of the western part of the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation who had friendly relations with Kievan Rus, and the wild Połowchans who formed the eastern part of the Confederation and who had hostile relations with Kievan Rus. 1413. As the Cuman-Kipchaks gained more territory, they drove off or dominated many tribes such as the Oghuz. Various Iranian and Finno-Ugrian tribes, Pechenegs, and Slav groups. They also raided the Byzantine Empire and a few times joined the Normans from southern Italy and the Hungarians in doing so. Over the course of time, feudalism would take over the traditional social structure of the Cumans, and this led to the changing of identity from kinship to territory-based. Some of the Cumans eventually settled and led sedentary lives involved in agriculture and crafts such as leather and iron working and weapon making. Others became merchants and traded from their towns along the ancient trade routes to regions such as the Orient, Middle East, and Italy. The Cumans also played the role of middlemen in trade between Byzantium and the East, which passed through the Cuman-controlled ports of Sudak, Suros, Oziv, and Saksin. Several land routes between Europe and the Near East ran through Cuman territories: the Zalesny, the Soliany, and the Varangian. Cuman towns Shurukin, Sarov/Sagrov, and Balin appeared in the Donets River basin. They were also inhabited by other peoples besides the Cumans. Due to the practice of Cuman towns being named after their khans, town names changed over time. The town of Shurukin appears as Ozana, Shuruk, and Cheshwiv. Rock figures called stone babas, which are found throughout southern Ukraine and other areas on the steppes of Russia, were closely connected with the Cuman religious cult of shamanism. The Cumans tolerated all religions, and Islam and Christianity spread quickly among them. As they were close to the Kievan Rus principalities, Cuman khans and important families began to Slavicize their names. For example, Yaroslav Tomzikovic, Hlibturiaevic, Yuri Konkakovic, and Danilo Kobyakovic. Ukrainian princely families were often connected by marriage with Cuman khans, lessening wars and conflicts. Sometimes the princes and khans waged joint campaigns. For example, in 1221 they attacked the trading town of Sudak on the Black Sea, which was held by the Seljuk Turks and which interfered with Rus-Cuman trade. A Mamluk nobleman from Aleppo. The Cumans were reported to be handsome people with blonde hair, fair skin, and blue eyes, and desirable women. Cuman women had a high reputation for their beauty amongst the Russian aristocracy. Robert de Clary reported that the Cumans often wore a sleeveless sheepskin vest, usually worn in conjunction with bracers. Underneath the vest was worn a short or long-sleeved tunic/tabard, extended to the mid-calf, splitting in the front and back between the legs. Men wore trousers and a kaftan, each fastened by a belt, which was the traditional costume. The women also wore kaftans, as well as pants, dresses, and tunics shorter than those worn by men. sometimes split along the front, back, and sides. Clothes were commonly colored deep crimson for decoration. Cuman men wore distinguishing conical felt or leather hats, pointy at the top with a broad brim, if made of felt, or a fur trim around the base, if made of leather. The brim of the hat was pointy at the front and upturned on the rear and at the sides. Women wore a large variety of headdresses and also wore conical hats but with a felt top and a cloth veil extending down the back. This veil only covered the back neck and not the hair or face. Another source states that it did cover the hair and that sometimes one or two braids were visible. Women wore a variety of jewelry, such as torques, a type of neck ornament consisting of one or several metal strands which were attached to a ribbon or necklace and hung around the neck, and headdresses that were made of a series of silver rings on a solid, cylindrically shaped material that was fastened at the temples. The men shaved the top of their head, while the rest of the hair was plaited into several braids. They also had prominent mustaches. Other cumans also wore their hair very long, without shaving the top. The women had their hair loose or braided with buns twisting at the side. Both men and women followed a tradition of braiding colored ribbons into their hair. For footwear, cuman men and women wore long leather or felt boots with support straps connected to their belt. Both men and women wore cloth or metal armbands. When the Cuman-Kipchaks swore oaths, it was done with swords in the hands that touched the body of a dog cut in two. The Italian Franciscan monk, traveler, and historian John of Plano Carpini says that when the Hungarian prince married the Cuman princess, 10 Cumans swore over a dog cut in half with a sword, that they would defend the Kingdom of Hungary. The Christian writer and historian of the Crusades, Jean de Joinville, c. 1224 c. 1317, mentions that when the Cumans and Byzantines made an alliance, the Cumans made a dog pass between both sides and cut it with a sword, obliging the Byzantines to do the same, the Cumans having said that both they and the Byzantines should be cut in pieces if they failed each other. Joinville described a Cuman noble's funeral. He was buried seated on a chair whilst his best horse and best sergeant were placed beside him alive. Prior to this, the sergeant was given a large sum of money by the Cuman leaders for the purpose of handing it back to them when they too would come into the afterlife. The Cuman Khan also gave a letter of recommendation to the sergeant, which was addressed to the first king of the Cumans, in which the present king testified to the sergeant's good character. After these proceedings, a huge mound was raised above the tomb. Cumans were buried in their warrior outfits. Wolves were greatly respected by the Cuman-Kipchaks, and they would sometimes howl along with them in commune. The personal bodyguard of the Khan were called bori, wolf in Turkic. Like other nomadic nations, the Cuman-Kipchaks initiated blood bonds, with the purpose of symbolically cementing a bond, by the drinking or mixing of each other's blood. Amongst the Cuman-Kipchaks, ethnic names often became personal names. This was also practiced amongst the Mongols. This practice involved naming newborns after the names of conquered tribes and people. Names such as Baskord, from the Bashkirs, Imek, from the Kimyks, Khitan, from the Mongol Khitan people, and Urus were used by the Cumans. Friar William of Rubruck, a Franciscan traveler who visited the Mongols in 1253-5, provides another account of Cuman customs. He mentions that Cumans built statues for dead notables, facing east and holding a cup. These statues are not to be confused with the Balbals, which represent the enemies that were killed by him. He also notes that for richer notables, the Cumans build tombs in the form of houses. Rubruck gives an eyewitness account about a man who had recently died. The Cumans had hung up 16 horses' hides, in groups of 4, between high poles, facing the 4 points of the compass. The mourners then also placed kumis, fermented mare's milk drink widely drunk in Inner Asia, for the dead man to consume. Other graves had plenty of stone statues placed around them, balbals, 4 tall ones placed to face the points of the compass. Rubruck also wrote here the Cumans, who are called Chapchat-Kipchak, used to pasture their flocks, but the Germans call them Valens and their province Volhynia, and Isidorus calls, the region stretching, from the river Don as far as the Azov Sea and the Danube, Alania. And this land stretches from the Danube as far as the Don, the borderline of Asia and Europe, one can reach there in 2 months with quick riding as the Tatars ride. And this country, which extends from the Danube to the Tanas Don, was all inhabited by the Chapkat Comans, and even further from the Don to the Volga, which rivers are at a distance of 10 days' journey, and in the territory between these two rivers, i.e. the Don and the Volga, where we continued our way, the Cuman-Kipchaks lived. For many years before the Mongol invasion, the Cuman-Kipchaks were in ambiguous relationships with their neighbors, often through marital and martial alliances. Khwarezmians, Byzantines, Georgians, and the Rus. At one time they could be at peace with one, at war with another. The Byzantine Empire hesitated to go to war with the Cuman-Kipchaks north of the Danube River. Instead, like the Hungarians, they chose to bribe them. Since Khwarezm had more important enemies, they hired the Cuman-Kipchaks for garrison duty. There were numerous ways the Cuman-Kipchaks could make a living as nomadic warriors. One could partake in questing and raiding with their tribe and subsequently keep the spoils. Another avenue was to seek employment as a mercenary in exchange for the guarantee of loot. One could serve in a garrison, although this caused those Cumans to eventually forget their light cavalry skills and become poor infantry. This was taken full advantage of when the Mongol army destroyed the Cuman-Kipchak garrison in Samarkand. Cuman-Kipchak women fought beside their fellow male warriors. Women were shown great respect and would often ride on a horse or wagon while the men walked. In their travels the Cumans used wagons to transport supplies as well as weapons such as mangonels and ballistas. Light felt tents with a frame consisting of wooden laths could be carried on top of wagons and easily be placed on the ground. The windows of the tents were grilled in such a way that it was difficult to see in but easy to see out. As the Cumans became more settled, they constructed forts for defense and settlement purposes. The Cuman-Kipchaks used dung for fires when firewood was not available. The Cumans had very strict rules, taboos, against theft, and thus would, without prohibition, loosen their horses, camels, and livestock, sheep, oxen, without shepherds or guards when they were stationary. The law of blood vengeance was common among the Cumans-Kipchaks. Up until the late 11th and early 12th centuries the Cumans fought mainly as light cavalry, later developing heavy cavalry. The main weapons of the Cumans were the recurved and, later, the composite bow, worn on the hip with the quiver, and the javelin, curved sword, a saber less curved than a scimitar, mace, and heavy spear for lancing. Due to European influence, some of the later period Cumans wielded war hammers and axes. For defense they used a round or almond-shaped shield, short-sleeved mail armor, consisting of commonly alternating butted and riveted rows, lamlar, iron or leather cuirass, shoulder spalders, conical or dome-shaped iron helmet with a detachable iron or bronze anthropomorphic faceplate, gold for princes and khans, and at times a camail suspended from the helmet, consisting of chain or leather. The armor was strengthened by leather or felt discs which were attached to the chest and back. The items suspended from the belts were a bow case with bow, a quiver, a knife, and a comb. They also wore elaborate masks in battle, shaped like and worn over the face. The Cuman Mamluks in Egypt were, in general, more heavily armed than Mongol warriors, sometimes having body armor and carrying a bow and arrow, axe, club, sword, dagger, mace, shield, and a lance. The Cuman Mamluks rode on larger Arabian horses in comparison to steppe ponies. The commonly employed Cuman battle tactic was repeated attacks by light cavalry archers, facing and shooting to the rear of the horse, then a feigned retreat and skilled ambush. To maintain this tactic to optimum efficiency the Cumans kept a large number of reserve horses, 10-12 remounts, to replace fatigued ones, so that a fresh horse was available at all times. The horsemen used oval-shaped stirrups and employed a large bridle for their horses. Another important accessory was a small whip attached to the rider's wrist. Tribal banners were either made of cloth with tribal emblems or dyed horsehair with more tails signifying greater importance of the warrior or group. Some of the Cumans who moved west were influenced by Western heraldry, and they eventually displayed hybridized European Cuman heraldry. Nicetas Choniates, while describing a battle in the vicinity of Barrow in the late 12th century, gave an interesting description of the nomadic battle techniques of the Cumans. The Cumans fought in their habitual manner, learned from their fathers. They would attack, shoot their arrows and begin to fight with spears. Before long they would turn their attack into flight and induce their enemy to pursue them. Then they would show their faces instead of their backs, like birds cutting through the air, and would fight face to face with their assailants and struggle even more bravely. This they would do several times, and when they gained the upper hand over the Romans-Byzantines, they would stop turning back again. Then they would draw their swords, release an appalling roar, and fall upon the Romans quicker than a thought. They would seize and massacre those who fought bravely and those who behaved cowardly alike. Robert de Clary gave another description. Each one has at least 10 or 12 horses, and they have them so well trained that they follow them wherever they want to take them, and they mount first on one and then on another. When they are on a raid, each horse has a bag hung on his nose, in which his fodder is put, and he feeds as he follows his master, and they do not stop going by night or by day. And they ride so hard that they cover in one day and one night fully 6 days' journey or 7 or 8. And while they are on the way they will not seize anything or carry it along, before their return, but when they are returning, then they seize plunder and make captives and take anything they can get. Nor do they go armed, except that they wear a garment of sheepskin and carry bows and arrows. It is understood that the Cumans practiced shamanism and Tengrism. Their belief system had animistic and shamanistic elements. They celebrated the cult of ancestors and provided the dead with objects whose lavishness paralleled the recipient's social rank. The Cumans referred to their shamans as kam, female, kam katun. Their activities were referred to as kam liket, meaning to prophesy. The Cumans used Iranian words to designate certain concepts uçmak, identical in Turkic, meaning fly away, paradise, and keshin meaning nest. The concept was that the soul has the form of a bird. Funerals for important members involved firstly creating a mound, then placing the dead inside, along with various items deemed useful in the afterlife, a horse, like the Bulgars, and sometimes a servant or slave. Cuman divination practices used animals, especially the wolf and dog. The dog/kopek was sacred to the Cuman-Kipchaks, to the extent that an individual, tribe, or clan would be named after the dog or type of dog. Cumans had shamans who communicated with the spirit world. They were consulted for questions of outcomes. The Cumans in Christian territories were baptized in 1227 by Robert, Archbishop of Esztergom, in a mass baptism in Moldavia on the orders of Borz Khan, who swore allegiance to King Andrew II of Hungary. Codex Cumanicus. The Codex Cumanicus, which was written by Italian merchants and German missionaries between 1294 and 1356, was a linguistic manual for the Turkic Cuman language of the Middle Ages, designed to help Catholic missionaries communicate with the Cumans. It consisted of a Latin-Persian Cuman glossary, grammar observations, lists of consumer goods and Cuman riddles. The first copy was written in the monastery of St. John near Saray. A later copy, 1330-1340, is thought to have been written in a Franciscan monastery. Later, different sections of the Codex, such as the Interpreter's Book, which was for commercial, merchant use, and the Missionary's Book, which contains sermons, psalms, and other religious texts along with Cuman riddles, were combined. The Interpreter's Book consists of 110 pages. Pages 163 contain alphabetically arranged verbs in Latin, Persian, and Cuman. The Missionary's Book contains vocabulary listings, grammatical notes, Cuman riddles, religious texts and some Italian verses. The Cuman riddles are the oldest documented material of Turkic riddles and constitute Turkic folklore. Some of the riddles have almost identical modern equivalents, for example Kazakh. The Codex Cumanicus is composed of several Cuman-Kipchak dialects. It is currently housed in the Biblioteca Marciana, in Venice, Cod. March. Latxlix. Some parts from the Codex's Pater Noster are shown below. Adams Kim Kodazin. Al Bolsunsanen at, Kelsunsanen Zanel, Bolsunsan and Tilmakan ni Sikimkot, Alida Yurdi. Kundekiat Mejamizni Bizjbugun Burgil. De Yaziklarms and Bizjboatelni Seek Bizbodrabiz Bizjyamanit Ken Lurj. De Yenin Snamakna Bizni Quirmal. Basa Barka Yamandan Bizni Kutzerl. Amen. In English, the text is, Our Father which art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our sins as we forgive those who have done us evil. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. The Cumans language was a form of Kipchak Turkic and was, until the 14th century, a lingua franca over much of the Eurasian steppes. A number of Cuman-Kipchak Arabic grammar glossaries appeared in Mamluk lands in the 14th and 15th centuries. It is supposed that the Cumans had their own writing system, mentioned by the historian Gyarfas, which could have been a runic script. The supposition that the Cumans had a runic script is also suggested by the academic Hakan Adamir, who mentioned a buckle with runic writing from a Cuman grave. There was also some Hazar Jewish linguistic influence upon the Cumans. The Cuman words Shabbat and Shabbatkon, meaning Saturday, are related to the Hebrew word Shabbat, meaning Sabbath. These Hebrew influences in the language may have resulted from contact or intermarriage between Hazars and some of the Cumans in the mid-11th century. Połowcy leaders, Khans, Ruthenian chronicles. Main article, Notable people of Cuman descent. Iskal or Eskal, possibly a self-name of a Bulgaric tribe, Nushabai, who were mentioned by Ahmed ibn Fadlan after visiting Volga region in 921-922. They also were mentioned by Abu Sa'd Garj in his Zayn al-Akbar. According to Bernhard Karlgren, Eskals became the Hungarian people Siklis. Yuri Ziyov thought that Iskal, who is mentioned in the Laurentian Codex about the first military encounter of Cumans against the Ruthenians on February 2, 1061, is personification of a tribal name. Sharukan/Sharagan, also known as Sharukan the Elder, grandfather of Konkuk. He was another Połowcy Khan who was victorious against the Ruthenian army of Yaroslavichy at the Alta River, Battle of the Alta River. According to the Novgorod First Chronicle, Sharukan was taken as prisoner by Sviatoslav II of Kiev in 1068, while no such information is provided in the Laurentian Codex. In May of 1107, along with Bonyak, Sharukan raided couple of Ruthenian cities, Pereyaslav and Lubny. However, already in August of the same year the collective Ruthenian army led by Sviatoslav carried out a devastating defeat to the Cuman horde, forcing Sharukan to flee. Bonyak/Maniac, Cuman Khan, who was actively involved in civil conflicts of Ruthenia. He had a brother Taz who perished at the battle on the Sula River in 1107. Bonyak was last mentioned in 1167 when he was defeated by Oleg of Sivria. Bonyak was a leader of the Cuman tribe Burcheviki that resided in steppes of the East Ukraine between modern cities of Zaporizhia and Donetsk. Tagorkin, 1028-1096, was mentioned in essays of the Byzantine Empress Anna Comani along with his compatriot Bonyak. He perished with his son at the battle on the Tribiz River against the Ruthenian army. Serchin, a son of Sharukan. He was a leader of a Cuman tribe that lived on the right banks of Seversky Donets. Chronicles mentioned that after the death of Vladimir II Monomakh, Grand Prince of Kiev, Serchin sent out an emissary and a singer Orev to Georgia after his brother Otrok/Otrok, who, with 40,000 Cuman troops, was in Georgia at the time, urging him to return. Khan Otrok agreed, giving up the fame and security he had won in Georgia. After smelling Ives Han, the grass of his native steppe, Serchin was mentioned in the poem of Apollon Makov, 1821-1897, Emshin. Otrok/Otrok, a son of Sharukan and a brother of Serchin. In 1111 he, along with his brother, withdrew to the lower Don region after losing a battle against the Ruthenians. There Otrok's horde joined the local Alans. In 1117 his army sacked Sarkal and 5 other cities belonging to the Turkils and Berendei, forcing the local Pechenegs, Berendei, and Turkils to flee to Ruthenia. Around the same time Otrok invaded the northern Caucasus, where he entered into conflict with local Circassians, pushing them beyond the Kuban River. The conflict was settled by a Georgian king, David IV of Georgia, who offered military service to Otrok against Seljuks in 1118. David also married the daughter of Otrok, Gurundukt. After withdrawal of Otrok away from the Don region, the Alans Duchy in East Ukraine was liquidated in 1116-17. Otrok returned after the death of Vladimir Monomakh in 1125. Kon-Kipchak/Kipchak, meaning trousers, grandson of Sharukan, son of Khan Otrok. He united the tribes of the eastern Cumans in the later half of the 12th century, after which in the 1170s and 1180s he launched a number of particularly destructive attacks on the settlements in the Duchy of Kiev, the Principality of Chernigov and the Principality of Pereyaslav. Kon-Kipchak gave aid to the princes of the Principality of Novgorod-Seversk in their struggle for control with the other Rus princes. Along with Kon-Kobyak/Kobek, Kon-Kipchak was routed on the Coral River in 1184 during an assault on Kievan Rus. In 1185, he defeated the army of Ihor Sviatoslavic, who was taken as a prisoner. Later, Kon-Kipchak laid siege to Pereyaslav and ravaged the Chernihiv and Kiev areas. His daughter married Prince Vladimir Igorevich of Putiful, Igor's son. It is hypothesized that Kon-Kipchak was with the Cumans who helped Ryurik Rostislavovich seizure and sack of Kiev in 1202. Kon-Kipchak is credited with certain technological advancements, such as Greek fire and a special bow that needed 50 men to operate. Kon-Kipchak was noted by the Rus to be greater than all the Cumans. He died in a skirmish that preceded the Battle of Volga River. The struggle to repel Kon-Kipchak and his army by Ihor Sviatoslavic and the Rus princes is immortalized in the epic The Tale of Igor's Campaign, Slovo Opoku Ihorivi. As the Cumans ceased to have a state of their own, their legacy as state-makers vanished. While the Cumans were gradually absorbed into Eurasian populations, certain families in Hungary, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Turkey, Romania, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Tatars in Crimea. The Cumans in Dobruja were assimilated into Bulgarian and Romanian people. Their trace can still be found in place names stretching from China to Macedonia. These place names are the city of Kumanovo in the northeastern Republic of Macedonia, a Slavic village named Kumanichevo in the Koster, Kastoria, district of Greece, which was changed to Lithia after Greece obtained this territory in the 1913 Treaty of Bucharest. Comani in Romania, Cuman, a city in Xinjiang, China, Kumana, a mountain in Loristan, Iran, the village of Koman in Iran, Kuman, a small town in Sistan va Balochistan, Iran, Połowcy, a town in Smolenskaya Oblast, Russia. Połowcy in Mahalyovsky Oblast, Belarus, the steppes north of the Caucasus Mountains referred to as Kuban as well as the Kuban River, the village of Cumani in Serbia, the village of Kumanica, in the municipality of Ivanjica, Serbia, the municipality of Cuman in the Fir district, Fir County, southwestern Albania, Cuman, a village and municipality in the Larik Rayon of Azerbaijan, the town and district of Ulus in the Sivas province of Turkey, Komata in Dobrogea, also Romania, the small village of Kumanite in Bulgaria. Kuman, a town in Kashkataryo, Uzbekistan, Kuman-san, a mountain peak near Ch Unchanged N, Gangwon, South Korea, the town of Kumanlar in Ordu, Turkey, Debrecen in Hungary, the village of Bugak in Hungary, the counties of Bács-Kiskun and Jasnágy-Konsolnok as well as the cities Kiskun-Halas and Kun-Szentmiklós in Hungary, the village of Kunmadaras in Greater Cumania, Hungary, and the town of Kumanov in Khmelnytska Oblast, Ukraine. The flower Kumaniga, Melalot, is also a relic of the Cumans. The Gagauz people are believed by some historians to be descendants of the Cumans. The name Kipchakli occurs as a modern Gagauz surname. The etymology of the Sea of Azov is popularly said to derive from a certain Cuman prince named Azam or Azov, who was killed defending a town in this region in 1067. As the Mongols pushed westward and devastated their state, most of the Cumans fled to Hungary, as well as the Second Bulgarian Empire, as they were major military allies. The Cuman participation in the creation of the Second Bulgarian Empire in 1185 and thereafter brought about basic changes in the political and ethnic sphere of Bulgaria and the Balkans. Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Asen II was descended from Cumans and settled them in the southern parts of the country, bordering the Latin Empire and the Thessalonican Despotate. Those territories are in present-day Turkish Europe, Bulgaria, and the Republic of Macedonia. The Cumans that settled in Hungary had their own self-government in a territory that bore their name, Kunsag, that survived until the 19th century. Two regions, Little Cumania and Greater Cumania, exist in Hungary. The name of the Cumans, Kun, is preserved in county names such as Bakskiskan, Kunbaja, and Jasnajikan Solnok, and town names such as Kiskan Halas, Kun Szentmiklós. The Cumans were organized into 4 tribes in Hungary, Kalbaz/Olas in Upper Cumania around Kharkag and the other 3 in Lower Cumania. The Cuman language disappeared from Hungary in the 17th or 18th centuries, possibly following the Turkish occupation. During the 1740s, when Cuman was no longer spoken, a Cuman version of the Lord's Prayer suddenly surfaced. It was taught in schools in Greater Cumania and Little Cumania until the mid-20th century, in turn becoming a cornerstone of Cuman identity. In the 20th century, enthusiastic self-styled Cumans collected Cuman folklore, which consisted of elements such as a traditional Cuman dance, Cuman characteristics such as pride and staunch Calvinism. This ethnic consciousness also had to do with the legal privileges that was attached on the Cumans' territory. Their 19th century biographer, Gyarfas Istvan, in 1870 was of the opinion that they originally spoke Hungarian, together with the Iazyges population. Despite this mistake, he has the best overview on the subject citation needed concerning details of material used. Cuman influence is also present in the modern Hungarian language, which contain Cuman loanwords. These loanwords show Cuman influence in the areas of horse breeding, eating, hunting and fighting. In 1918, after the World War I, the Cuman National Council was formed in Hungary, which was an attempt to separate the Kunsag region, Greater Cumania and Little Cumania, from the Hungarian state, with the aim of forming a new independent Cuman state in Europe. The Cuman National Council declared the independence of Kunsag, and elected its president, Count Gedeon Radai, on December 18. However, the council's efforts remained unsuccessful. In 1939, Cuman descendants organized celebrations for the 700th anniversary of their arrival in Hungary, where they emphasized their separate ethnic existence and identity with ceremonial speeches. In 1995, the Cuman Memorial Site was inaugurated as a tribute to the Cuman ancestors and the redemption of the former Najikan district. In 2009, and subsequently 2012, a world meeting of the Cumans was held in Kharkag. During the first meeting, which lasted 2 weeks, academic conferences, historical exhibitions, publications, presentations of traditional and cultural festivals and lectures in relation to the Cumans were held. In the 2012 meeting, the Minister for Rural Development, Sandor Fazekas, mentioned how Cuman traditions are still kept alive, such as costumes, folk songs, and food. Toponyms of the Cuman language origin can be found in some Romanian counties of Vaslui and Galati, including the names of both counties. When some of the Cumans moved to Hungary, they brought with them their Komondor dogs. The Komondor breed has been declared one of Hungary's national treasures, to be preserved and protected from modification. The name Komondor derives from Komondor, meaning Cuman dog. In the countries where the Cumans were assimilated, family surnames derived from the words for Cuman, such as Koman or Kun, Cuman, are not uncommon. Traces of the Cumans are the Bulgarian surnames Kunat or Kumanov, feminine Kunova, Kumanova, and Asenov, its Macedonian variants Kunovski, Kumanovski, feminine Kumanovska, the Kazakh surname Kumanov, the widespread Hungarian surname Kun, the Hungarian surnames of Kserten, Ksoreg, Koksker, Karaks, Kaks, the Hungarian surname of Kangura by name of one of the families of Karkag. The words Kangur and Karkag derive from Kongur and Karsak respectively, and occur as modern-day clan names of the Kazakhs. The Kipchak tribes Kongur and Karsak, as well as names used by the Kyrgyz in the Manas epic mentioned as Kongurbey, lord of the Mongol Kalmyk people, and the warrior Kongrulu, the Hungarian surname of Kapskog, from Kipchak, Kapsig Tojasis Kovacs, a byname of Kovacs family, as well as the name of Esenii Kopskog of Hungary, and the Greek surname Esin 54. The names Cuman in Romania and its derivatives, however, do not appear to have any connection to the medieval Cumans, as it was unrecorded until very recent times, and the places with the highest frequency of such names has not produced any archaeological evidence of Cuman settlement. Over time, Cuman culture exerted an influence on the Cyengai/Hungarian Ksangos and Romanian culture in Moldavia, due to the Hungarians in Moldavia socializing and mingling with the Cumans between the 14th and 15th centuries. Hakan Adamir, a Turkic linguist, states that the IR of the Cyengai/Ksangos and Siklis dialect, which means carve, notch, as well as the words Urk/Uruk, meaning lasso, noose, Zapu, meaning wool, and Korhani, meaning small mountain, hill, are of Cuman-Kipchak origin. Additionally, the Cumans could have also had some connection with Siklis runes. Several Romanian as well as Hungarian academics believe that a significant Cuman population lived in Moldavia in the 15th century. These Cumans later assimilated into the Romanian population. People in Hungary with the surname Palic are descended from the Cumans, and possibly Kabars and Pechenegs. Palic originates from the Slavic word Polovets/Polovci. Although the Palics were similar to the Hungarians in origins and culture, they were considered distinct groups by the Turks. The first written record of the word Palic as the name of a people appears in the Meskvest register in 1784. Genetics. In the Hungarian village of Ksenchel, on the borders of what is still called Kiskensag, Little Cumania, an archaeological excavation in 1975 revealed the ruins of a medieval church with 38 burials. Several burials had all the characteristics of a Cumanian group, richly jeweled, non-Hungarian, and definitely Cumanian-type costumes, the 12-spiked mace as a weapon, bone girdles, and associated pig bones. In view of the cultural objects and the historical data, the archaeologists concluded that the burials were indeed Cumanian from the mid-13th century, hence some of the early settlers in Hungary were from that ethnic group. In 1999 the grave of a high-status Cumanian from the same period was discovered about 50 meters from the church of Ksenchel. This was the first anthropologically authenticated grave of a Cumanian chieftain in Hungary, and the contents are consistent with the ethnic identity of the excavated remains from the church burials. A separated area of the chieftain grave contained a complete skeleton of a horse. A genetic study done on Cuman burials in Hungary determined that they had substantially more Western Eurasian mitochondrial DNA lineages. In a 2005 study by Erika Bogaxi-Sabo et al. Of the mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, of the Cuman nomad population that migrated into the Carpathian Basin during the 13th century, 6 haplogroups were revealed. One of these haplogroups belongs to the M lineage, haplogroup D, and is characteristic of Eastern Asia, but this is the second most frequent haplogroup in southern Siberia too. All the other haplogroups, H, V, U, U3, and JT, are West Eurasian, belonging to the N macro haplogroup. Out of the 11 remains, 4 samples belong to haplogroup H, 2 to haplogroup U, 2 to haplogroup V, and 1 each to the JT, U3, and D haplogroups. In comparison to the Cumans, modern Hungarian samples represent 15 haplogroups. All but 1 is a West Eurasian haplogroup, the remaining 1 is East Asian, haplogroup F, but all belong to the N lineage. 4 haplogroups, H, V, U*, JT, present in the ancient samples, can also be found in the modern Hungarians, but only for haplogroups H and V were identical haplotypes found. Haplogroups U3 and D occur exclusively in the ancient group, and 11 haplogroups, HV, U4, U5, K, J, J1A, T, T1, T2, W, and F, occur only in the modern Hungarian population. Haplogroup frequency in the modern Hungarian population is similar to other European populations, although haplogroup F is almost absent in continental Europe. Therefore the presence of this haplogroup in the modern Hungarian population can reflect some past contribution. The results suggested that the Cumanians, as seen in the excavation at Ksenjl, were far from genetic homogeneity. Nevertheless, the grave artifacts are typical of the Cumanian steppe culture, and 5 of the 6 skeletons that were complete enough for anthropometric analysis appeared Asian rather than European, Horvath 1978, 2001, including 2 from the mitochondrial haplogroup H, which is typically European. It is interesting that the only skeleton for which anthropological examination indicated a partly European ancestry was that of the chieftain, whose haplotype is most frequently found in the Balkans. The study concluded that the mitochondrial motifs of Cumans from Ksenjl show the genetic admixtures with other populations rather than the ultimate genetic origins of the founders of Cuman culture. The study further mentioned, this may be the result of the habits of the Cumanian nomads. Horsemen of the steppes formed a political unit that was independent from their maternal descent or their language and became members of a tribal confederation. According to legends, Cumanians frequently carried off women from raided territories. So the maternal lineages of a large part of the group would reflect the maternal lineage of those populations that had geographic connection with Cumanians during their migrations. Nevertheless, the Asian mitochondrial haplotype in sample Cu26 may still reflect the Asian origins of the Cumanians of Ksenjl. However, by the time the Cumanians left the Transcarpathian steppes and settled in Hungary, they had acquired several more westerly genetic elements, probably from the Slavic, Finno-Ugric, and Turkic-speaking peoples who inhabited the regions north of the Black and Caspian Seas. The results from the Cuman samples were plotted on a graph with other Eurasian populations, showing the genetic distances between them. The Eurasian populations were divided into 2 distinct clusters. One cluster contained all the Eastern and Central Asian populations and can be divided into 2 subclusters. One subcluster includes mainly Eastern Asian populations, Buryat, Korean, and Kyrgyz lowland populations, and the other subcluster harbors mainly Central Asian populations, Mongolian, Kazakh, Kyrgyz highland and Uyghur populations. The second cluster contained the European populations. Inside the second cluster, based on HVSI motifs, a clear structure was not detectable, but almost all European populations, including the modern Hungarians, assembled in one section with small distances between each other. Cumans were outside this section. They were found to be above the abscissa of the graph. This is the population from the second cluster, which is closest to the East Central Asian cluster. Considering genetic distances, Cumans, of Ksenjl, are nearest to the Finnish, Komi and Turkish populations. The modern-day Cuman descendants in Hungary are differentiated genetically from the Hungarians and other European populations. The Cumans appear in Rus culture in the Rus epic poem The Tale of Igor's Campaign and are the military enemies of the Rus in Alexander Borodin's opera Prince Igor, which features a set of Połowcy dances. The name Cuman is the name of several villages in Turkey, such as kumanlar, including the Black Sea region. The indigenous people in the Altai Republic, Cumandins, Cumandi, are descended from the Cumans. Cumandin Y DNA chromosomes belong mainly to the M73 subclade, which is mostly limited to Central Asian populations. The same subclade is also observed among other Central Asian populations such as Altaians, Kazakhs, and various South Siberian populations.